approve any motions that are made. So this is a study session, and we're told that we can talk about anything we darn well feel like. How freeing. So why don't we start with you, Brian? And
all right, well, I'll just kind of introduce the item that's on our agenda tonight for our discussion, and basically that's to review our ordinance requirements dealing with our downtown two-story standard and the related floor area ratio, because they're kind of related, not directly, but there's some synergy there. Another one that's kind of fits into there is if you had a maximum lot coverage requirement, and we don't. Don't know whether we need one or not, but those things work together in determining whether two-story buildings are required or not. And as you know, with the previous library project, that was a major topic, and a lot of time and expense was expended in trying to decide whether the code was definitive in requiring two-story or not. And so in my recommendation is that we need to adjust our ordinance to reflect our intent and make it more clear and specific whether it's to absolutely require two-story or not. And we had a work session here with the Planning Commission a couple months back that was a follow-up of one that we had with the council on landscaping requirements. And this is a follow-up of a work session we had with the council on the two-story requirement. And there was desire, the last meeting the Planning Commission had, to hear specifically on January 15th of 2014, the council did meet and attempted to provide some direction to the Planning Commission and staff. And I was going to share you the direction that we got, which wasn't a whole lot.
was the key word in that attempted?
There was that word I used.
Yes, and that you stressed.
And so here's the direction that I feel that we got from the council to the best of my interpretation from that January 15th meeting. They could not agree amongst themselves or provide any specific direction, but they did make some general statements that the Planning Commission and staff might be able to focus and respond to. They very clearly believe that we are likely to see new construction in the downtown area, and they want to make sure that our regulations reflect, quote, what modern zoning theory would require for a downtown area in terms of having the right landscaping ratio and whether to require two-story buildings or not, and possibly, if we do, if there's any exceptions to the two-story requirement that we could identify. And so that's really the only thing I could get from them. And they wanted these items to be reviewed and considered by the Planning Commission. And so that's why I did the work session with you on the landscaping ratio and requirement. And now we're doing one on the downtown's two-story and floor area ratio, so that basically I believe they've pushed this at your level, and other than saying that we want to make sure that we have modern requirements that deal with our downtown. And in partial response to that, staff actually feels like our current ordinance standards pretty much do reflect modern theory, because they were adopted in just 2008, and they were prepared by a consulting firm based upon a tremendous amount of can-be public input. And that was done to create this document here. This document is the Canby Downtown Master Plan, and the public input that went into this was in 2001. And there was a lot of public input, and you can see it's a big document, and it's many pages, and it provided the direction on what we wanted in the downtown area. And it was pretty clear that the intent was for two-story downtown buildings, but it didn't in anywhere state that you would absolutely develop an ordinance standard that made it mandatory in all cases. It didn't say that, but there was certainly many pages in here where the intent was to require two-story buildings. And the important thing right now, dealing with the two-story requirement, is that it is only applicable to the C1 zoning district, which is our downtown area, and the core commercial sub-area of the downtown overlay. And so we have some downtown overlay and core commercial sub-area on the south side of the highway. But that area over there isn't zone C1. And so it's not applicable on the other side of the highway. The two-story requirement that's in the code today that was unclear and uncertain when we were applying it to the library is only applicable on this side in the C1 zone that has the downtown overlay, that has the core commercial sub-area. And so that's a very limited area that stretches from First Avenue up to the other side of Wake Park, and basically from Ivy Street over to Elm, in that kind of small core area is the only place that the current two-story applies, or would apply if we want to make it very clear that all buildings must be two stories in this area. And so, to me, that's one of the things that the council wanting us to do, and that's something that I'm recommending as the planning director that we do, so that there's more certainty if we get another development request in the downtown area. And right now, they're working on another library project. The same issue will come up again on it, and it would be nice if we had something in the code that could apply to it and be more certain, so we don't kind of chase our tails again when that comes up again. Then the landscaping issue was kind of related in that, again, on the library project, there was discussion about is the 7.5% ratio that's required in the downtown area more than it needs to be. And part of the rationale to that was, basically the fact that you allow buildings to be built up to the property boundary, and there's no maximum lot coverage, which means you could cover the entire lot with a building if it wasn't for the landscaping requirement.
Where did the original idea that 7.5%, where did that come from? I'm just curious. I mean, I imagine it just didn't come out of thin air, so.
No, and I wasn't here,
okay.
when they were discussing all that, but part of it came from the public input. I don't think a percentage did, but I know that there was a desire to still have landscaping in the downtown area from the public input received. And then the percentage appears to match, as far as we know, at least at that time, what is similar to other downtown areas, although in the council work session I specifically indicated that downtown Portland doesn't require any. And so if you go downtown Portland, the only landscaping you're going to find are the great big pots with trees and flowers out on the sidewalks, but of course their sidewalks are 16 to 20 feet wide versus ours 8 foot to 11 foot wide sidewalks. and that kind of thing. So there's some differences there. But so I'm sure the standards for landscaping can range. And one of the things that we may attempt to do here to make sure that we are still believe that we have a modern zoning theory and practice is to poll a few of the similar downtown small communities and see what their actual landscaping standard is and see if ours is greater than that or not. Because that's my only other recommendation really in terms of our landscaping code is I think it's working well in the downtown area. I don't think it would hurt us a bit if it was lowered to say 5% or even possibly less. But certainly 5% I think would still give us more landscaping if we redevelop downtown than we have today in most areas. But wouldn't be maybe as burdensome as it appeared to have been with the proposed library project, because they were struggling to find landscaping.
And when they tried to call the little green spots under the bike racks landscaping, I thought that was a bit of a stretch.
And also, we were going to count any landscaping they could put on the side of a wall, and that would count as square footage as well. In this particular case of that previous library project, they did not find anywhere where that was going to be suitable, but they looked really close to see if they could do trellis or something on a wall and count that as well.
I've got some really nice little English ivy sprouts that they could probably borrow on there.
There's one that would climb, that's right.
Everybody does.
No cost.
So I'm going to just attempt to give you guys a little background information, and all this is to do is to help you focus and help us decide what do we want to do in the downtown with regard to this two-story requirement, and how do you think the floor area ratio fits in, if at all. We may not need to adjust it in any way. But there was a statement made that the floor area ratio in conjunction with the maximum lot coverage standard would result in a required two-story building in downtown. And it clearly did not in the case of the library. And the reason it didn't primarily is because whoever the drafters were and whoever were thinking of that statement that it would require two-story didn't account for a development that didn't have on-site parking. If the library project had on-site parking, that probably would have required, because the surface parking would have been part of the floor area ratio, and it would have shot it up to be 2 stories. But the fact that we didn't have any required on-site parking, it didn't result in what they said it was going to result. It just simply didn't. And so the statement was false that was in the purpose statement of the code. It just wasn't correct. When you study our downtown, take a few pictures and look around, you'll see that even though there's scattered 2-story buildings in the downtown area, and a couple of them historic buildings of note, and is it the Backstop Bar and Grill that's our primary restored building, and but primarily most of the downtown is actually still a 1-story business environment. If you were to look down Holly Street from the new First Avenue redevelopment parking lot and look northward, the tallest building you see is City Hall, and it's not a 2-story building, it just has a point on it. And so all you see is 1-story buildings. But here we have the new Anders building across from Wake Park, and that's a nice 2-story building that's new, and as far as I'm concerned, it fits in very well in the downtown area. And so I don't think there's any reason why 2-story buildings aren't appropriate in the downtown area. And here's an aerial, and if you looked at it really closely, you'll see a couple several two-story buildings in the overall downtown area, but it's not the majority that you see. One thing that I might mention in thinking about this is think of our zoning ordinance itself and the fact that we have different zoning districts, different commercial zoning districts. Why did we give the downtown a different commercial zoning district than we did the areas along the highway? And one of the answers is you want to create unique environments. And so we really want to see the physical development of the community reflect physically something a little different in the downtown zoning district than you get with the other zoning districts. And so that's why the building height, the lot coverage, the setbacks, the landscaping, all these different standards, somehow or other, they all work together to result in a slightly different physical environment that you end up with over time. And so I believe that the intent of the downtown zoning district was primarily a more intense development scenario than you would find anywhere else. And what's one of the very best ways to make development more intense, but to make it go up. And so if you look elsewhere in town, in the commercial areas, you have even less two-story buildings than you do in the downtown area. And if you think nationally, or just the rest of the state and other cities you've been in, it's very, very common for your core business district, your core downtown, to have taller buildings, to be more intense. And so that's partly what I think the intent of the different zoning district was. And it was the intent of the downtown overlay district that was invented when we finished this downtown Canby master plan to enhance and solidify that downtown was going to be different than the rest of the community. And I think one of the best ways to do that is to encourage, at a minimum, two-story buildings. And if you want to help alleviate the confusion that we had with the first library project, you either make it very clear that it's just a desire, or you make it very clear that it's required in all circumstances, or with exceptions. And some of the exceptions that we've talked about in the past is if you have a building that appears visually to be two-story but really isn't, because of the window fenestration and that kind of thing, because the real intent is to provide an intense pedestrian environment that gives you a solid wall of buildings in the block, instead of the highway scenario where you have space between all the buildings and most likely parking lots in front of the buildings. In downtown, you have no parking lots in front of the buildings. They're either to the side or the rear, if you have any. And you have buildings touching each other, and you have them up to the sidewalk. And to make the environment even more different, you have multiple story buildings. And in the ideal scenario, every downtown design book that I've ever seen encourages residential and or office upstairs and retail on the ground floor with windows, so that it encourages and invites that interaction with the environment instead of a solid wall. And so those are the basic components that you end up getting to help promote a vibrant downtown. And that's really what our goal is a vibrant downtown. There's many different ideas on exactly how you get there, but there is a lot of similarity in what most downtowns have done that are successful. And I've got a couple of those things indicated on the slides up here. One of the things that we do here in Canby is we have a Main Street program, and the Main Street program is a nationwide program, and it's been going for years and years and years and has a proven track record. And one of the things that they emphasize very much so is this, what I just said, this ground floor retail and upstairs for residential or office uses. And they've been doing that program with every Main Street city in the nation and pounding that and saying that that's what you need to do. You need people living downtown that will then go to your businesses. And one of the best ways to promote that is to have two-story buildings so you have a place for them to live. You can also develop high density right on the perimeter of your downtown. And that's something else that Canby is trying to implement by, in the past, rezoning our perimeter to the downtown to R2 high-density zoning.
You know, I travel around the local area quite a bit in my work, so I'm trying to think of an example, a successful example of what you're referring to with the retail on the bottom and the mixed use up above. And on the one hand, I think of the Pearl down in downtown Portland as that. I don't know if that's a good example of being successful. Then I think of the Round in Beaverton as being one of the biggest failures that's ever existed.
Yeah, those examples are on a larger scale, and they're not quite the same thing that would be practical here in Canby, in that you have huge 11, 12-story buildings that are all residential. And I think some of them may have a retail in the very lowest floor, which helps promote that idea. But then you go up all these stories, and so it's just at a bigger scale. But I think they are doing exactly what you're saying, is retail on the bottom floor, residential on the top, or in a real mixed environment, you can mix some offices in there too. Maybe you have retail, 2 floors of offices, and then you have residential up above that. But I think we have a couple examples. I didn't try to pinpoint where they are in downtown Canby. Just the building next to the library, existing library, has, I don't know, I don't think it's the same building as Place to Be, but it's kind of connected to them, or the next one over.
The back side of it.
Yeah, they have people living upstairs.
It's like the back side of that building up on top in the alleyway.
And there may be a couple other examples already in downtown Canby where there's residential just upstairs. And
There's an office building down on 3rd, I think, too, that has the same scenario going on.
so, I mean, that's as simple as what we're trying to do, is have more 2-story buildings so you can have more opportunity to put, and to be flexible. If there really is a lawyer's office that wants to be upstairs, then by all means allow them to do that. But if there's somebody that wants to promote the living space up there, then let's do that as well. And if you design your building with your intent, you can make those design features inside that help make it quieter and that kind of thing by building the building specifically, knowing that somebody's going to be living upstairs and making it a better living environment that way, because you planned it from the get-go to be that way. Very simply, I've looked through several books on downtown planning, and they all say about the same thing here, that you want to promote a vibrant city center, and the way they say to do that is promote a diversity of use, encourage compactness. You don't want your downtown getting too big where you have this high intensity because you can't walk from one side to the other, or if you have high density apartments or high rises right on the edge so people can walk downtown and visit downtown without having to get into a bus or drive. If it's not compact, it's too far for them to walk, and so then they're going to get in their car and they're going to want a parking lot downtown and all of those kind of things. And so you really want to eliminate as much parking as you can from downtown, but yet you need to provide it for good accessibility to those that have to drive to downtown. And so as your downtown gets bigger and your city gets bigger, you try to go up with your parking lots rather than surface parking lots, because if you just do surface, you don't have the compact downtown. And you want it to be compact. And so these are principles that architectural, landscape designers, city planners have put in textbooks for ages that say this is what you need to do if you want a successful, vibrant downtown. And so they're saying foster intensity of development. Once again, what's one of the best ways to do that? Require or encourage buildings to be multi-story.
I guess that I'm kind of getting hung up right now in a definition of what a vibrant downtown Canby might look like. And I think that for me, because I'm not walking anywhere. You know, I mean, I will walk, I won't walk from my house, which is over by the Dahlia Farm, to downtown. So I'll be driving wherever I go, and I think that most people do that. I don't know that walking is a, sounds real good, but I think that there are
It just needs to be an option.
It needs to be an option. That is correct. So, so what is a vibrant downtown? How do we define that?
And that's a good point, and that's what we have to keep in mind in all of this, and that's why we have a choice of the kind of downtown Canby we want to create. And the only thing that staff currently has to go on is that we polled the community in meeting after meeting and asked them, what kind of downtown do you want? They came up with this plan, and the plan strongly encouraged two-story buildings. That's the only thing we have to go by. Now, so at this point, the city council couldn't agree among themselves to tell us and direct the planning commission that please change the ordinance so it requires two-story buildings. We didn't get that direction from them. And so it's up to you and staff to work on this and decide how we want a vibrant downtown to occur here. And we always hear over and over from Cambyites that we don't want to be just like Portland. Okay, Portland doesn't have any landscaping requirements downtown, so maybe we do want some. Maybe, because that's one component that would make us look different. And maybe they like the idea of some landscaping in a downtown area. If you look at the current buildings we have in the core area, there's some open space that isn't fully developed yet, but I'm not sure I would necessarily call that landscaping. It just hasn't developed yet. But where we are developed, there's very little, if any, landscaping. The landscaping has come with the newest buildings because we currently have a standard that requires 7.5% landscaping. Interesting thing is the new memory care center at Fur and Second. You don't see the landscaping because it's in the courtyard in the middle. But there's 7.5% landscaping on that site, but it's internal. So all of those things go into your visualization of what you want downtown Canby to look like. And I'm having trouble with my throat still from the flu, I think, for 2 weeks here, but deciding how intense is suitable for Canby would say something about how many floors, how many stories would be appropriate. Currently, our standard says we can go up to 60 foot. And maybe your math's better than mine if you divided 60 by maybe 15 feet per floor. I don't know how many stories that is.
Four.
Yeah, so we probably wouldn't get a building much taller than 4 stories in Canby if somebody wanted to do that. And we can take an example recently where we put a lot of effort into assisting Canby Rental down at, is that Elm and First?
Yep.
They want to redevelop their building. They want to put some investment in it and grow their business, but their current building is ancient and it's falling apart, and they don't think that it's worth investing to fix the second story up because the building's in such poor shape. So they explored tearing it down and building a new building. And we had a grant that helped design that new building for them. And in the end, at least for now, not that they might not consider it three years or so from now, they said, we just can't afford it. We can't do that. And so that's one of the responses you're going to get potentially from downtown businesses that want to do something or consider redevelopment, is they're going to find that developing two-story buildings is more expensive than developing a one-story building. And so if they're on the margin, they're going to choose not to do it if it's just encouraged. And so, I mean, I can't be positive, but that would be that's what I think will happen more often than not, is that local Canby businesses, if they aren't some rather large outfit that's come in and bought, if it's a local business wanting to invest and redo, they're probably going to find that they can't afford to build a two-story building, or they'll choose not to do that little extra if it's not required. And so I think that should enter into your thought processes too, that you may want to have strong encouragement. One alternative is for us to figure out more ways to incentivize two-story requirement, so it really is optional. But that is really difficult for us to do. We tried to do that, I don't know, what was in our low-impact development standards. We worked more on trying to incentivize people to use drainage swales and plant gardens to filter water and do roof gardens and all of these kind of low-impact ways to handle stormwater runoff. And we hardly came up with anything that has much merit. We just couldn't figure out how to incentivize it. And I think you'll find the same thing with two-story buildings. There may be something we can figure out to do, but I think it'll be very difficult to result in actual required two-story buildings without just making it required.
Oh, wait.
Until the cost of land or something like that in downtown Canby is great enough that people will come in and buy it because they want that opportunity to do multi-story buildings. And that means the price of downtown land's probably going to have to raise before that happens. At least that's my best guess, not being a developer,
Yeah.
knowing about that. But anyhow, that's probably enough there, but you do need to provide the parking, the accessibility to people that drive in the downtown, to use downtown. That's part of the accessibility. And you have to create the linkages so that people can walk or bike or other means to get downtown. You also have to build a positive identity, and that's part of the reason we have the Main Street program. We have somebody to promote events downtown. And one of the important things they say is providing a unique place, and that means doing what the public has control over, which is the streets. We don't have control over anything else. So we do streetscapes, and we do plaza designs when we can on public property. And that's kind of what we did on the First Avenue. We had an opportunity of the public owning something and trying to make it a unique place, something that's a plaza-like or that has attractive landscaping, something that would draw people downtown. And that's all the the books say is focus on what you have control over, and it's the streetscape. Make sure that it's attractive, put trees, put park benches, put nice lighting, put the banners, and all of those things. That's what the Main Street program has been focusing on for years here in Canby.
So if you had to evaluate it, though, would you say that it's been successful? I mean, considering the dollars spent, I mean, I'm just curious whether how you've measured, how you're going to measure success when it comes to the Main Street project. I mean, it looks very nice. I mean, that's I wasn't around. I mean, I wasn't involved, so I don't know how much money was spent and at what cost to the businesses along there in terms of lost revenue and clientele for the businesses along there. So I guess for me, I would be, the first thing that I would be thinking about is how are we going to measure the success of the Main Street project? Are we going to measure it in terms of just being aesthetically pleasing, or are we going to measure it in terms of how much business has been brought into those shops and businesses along First Avenue? To me, that would be the measure of success, but that's just me.
I would posit that there's some even simpler ways to measure success. And that's if you go outside of Canby and you go into other small cities like Canby across the nation, and you compare the vibrancy of a downtown, and the number one way is, are there boarded up vacant buildings? And you'll find that Canby doesn't have that. And that's a sign of tremendous success, because most small towns do. And so you can say that part of that is because of the work that has been done to keep the downtown attractive, because it's competing with the highway commercial developments. And so again, you have to have something that's different here, or it's a direct competition. If you make the downtown a little bit different atmosphere, then you have a reason for people to come downtown rather than to go somewhere else, because they're looking for a different kind of shopping experience or a different atmosphere. Otherwise, you're in direct competition, and that's what happened a whole history, 30 to 40 years after World War II, when the mall develops or the big Fred Meyer shopping center develops a mile away from your downtown, it sucks it dry. And that's been proven over and over and over, and that's one reason the Main Street developed itself and became so successful. How do we combat that? And so again, they go back to all these principles. Your downtown has to be different. You've got to do something to keep it alive. And then the other thing that's an important planning theory that's still widely supported and believed in by most planners everywhere is that a truly successful community has a strong downtown. Now, there are some exceptions. A nearby city just up the road, I think, is very successful, the city of West Lynn, and they're kind of lacking a strong centralized downtown.
Yeah, try and find it.
Exactly.
Yeah, where is
And
it?
so what they've had to do is try to focus on 4 regional downtowns in their community and promote each one of those as being unique and making a whole, kind of. And that's what they've tried to do. And I don't know what they're doing today. I haven't been there for a while. And so there are exceptions, but generally speaking, if you've got a crumbling downtown with lots of boarded up vacant spaces, if your town isn't too big, then the rest of the town isn't thought of that highly either, is usually what you find. And so keeping your downtown vibrant seems to be a continuing principle. And so, we're all in agreement that we want it to be vibrant, but we just have trouble defining it, like you said. And not having empty spaces, having a variety will get the people there. And if you don't have a lot of people coming downtown, then it's not really vibrant.
You know, that makes sense.
Our visioning plan, as I mentioned, was done in 2001, extensive community-driven visioning. Then they always say, well, how do you get to the vibrant city center? Well, the normal process is to have a vision. We did that. The next process is to pass codification, is to codify your vision in ordinance standards. We did that in 2008. We adopted our current city, and that's what's in this slide program, is our downtown design guidelines. And our attempt at the two-story requirement, which was recommended in the vision, left a little to be desired because it left enough wiggle room that we could argue both sides of whether two stories was required or not. And that's where we are again, is that I don't know that we need to study everything about downtown, but we've been directed to at least consider tightening up or deciding where do we want to be on this two-story requirement and possibly landscaping ratio. I already mentioned that there was a statement in our code that says, right up here, it says, the proposed floor area ratio in conjunction with the maximum lot coverage, which we don't have one, ensures that development will be a minimum of 2 floors along the street in the C1 portion. And it clearly did not do that, or the library, original library building proposed would have been 2 stories. It was believed that, or that when we applied the development standards in a chart, there was nothing that said you have to have a 2-story building. There was only this purpose statement. And so that's where I'm thinking that we still need to tighten something up. And if we decide as a planning commission that we want 2-story buildings, we could be done with this with 1 sentence change. We put 2 stories required in our table. We could get rid of a sentence in the purpose statement that confused us, and we'd be done. But if we're not sure we want 2-story buildings, and we want to encourage or something like that, then our job will be a little bit harder. Or we can take it out altogether and not worry about forcing 2 stories and let the free capital market system and the price of land determine what happens. And be perfectly happy if we like our downtown now, because it's mostly 1-story building, and why do we need to worry about converting it to 2 stories? So I can talk either side, and it's, you know, I don't really care, but I do care to the degree that if you want a vibrant downtown, most of the research and the books that have been written say you need to move towards 2-story buildings, and that's the only advice that I can give you.
And of course, then you have the, going back to the Canby rental situation, there's your conundrum right there.
That's right.
You know, not really, a business that really isn't conducive, you know, have no need for a 2-story building.
And so it may sound harsh, but what some communities are willing to do is forego what an existing longtime businessman may, after he evaluates what he may prefer to do, a 1-story building, and hold out for the ideal physical improvement for the downtown as a whole, which is in your standards, that no, redevelopment in our downtown will be 2 stories, because in the long term, it will best benefit and contribute to the vibrancy of our downtown, and we'll hold out for that. And it's no different than some towns holding out for the right development to come, not just approving any proposal that comes along, but looking for one that truly meets their standards, whether they're in design standards or some other aspect that they've adopted for their community. And I've seen that in certain places, and it's somewhat hard for some communities to do because they'll use the, rightly so, that any new building's better than what we had. And you hear that all the time, and it's true, especially if you've got an old building that's about falling down and they just don't want to invest in fixing it up. And a brand-new building does look nice, but if you have a vision for your community, sometimes it's worth waiting until you get a proposal that meets it. That's what planning's about. That's what these documents are about. And then how well you want to, how harsh you want to be in demanding that that's the only acceptable vision that we're going to accept is on the regulations that you put in the code, the ordinances, and how specific they become. So we're back again. Do we make it wishy-washy two-story requirement like we have today, where we spent thousands of dollars hiring a land use attorney that could argue it either way?
And did.
And did. Or do you make it specific? And now I've got the floor area ratio up here, and it's kind of a complicated concept. Just on the basis, it's pretty easy. It's the floor area ratio is the total floor area of the building, all floors, divided by the net lot area. And in our case, our definition in the code says that if you have surface parking, you're going to include that as part of the lot area, I guess. That was, in our case, exclusive of parking structures, but inclusive of the surface parking. So your lot area is going to include service parking areas, but not parking structures. But anyhow, it's that ratio. And so our current floor area ratio in the downtown area is 0.80. So 80% of your lot, I guess, has to be covered by a building. And so what floor area ratio tends to do is result in taller buildings with smaller footprints, because you can count all the floors to meet your ratio. And so if you had, I don't know, I have so much trouble with this concept, so that's why I've got this up here for you to the definition. I just have trouble making all of that work and explaining it. And maybe it's not as difficult as I think it is, but you can't use floor area ratio, though, as a direct determinant of the height of a building or its site coverage. It's related to it, but it's not a direct determinant. So we just use that ratio. If you had a 0.1 floor area ratio, I guess you're going to end up having a multi-story building, because especially if you have a % of landscape requirement, I mean, you can't cover the entire lot with your building if you have a 7.5% landscape requirement. And so you know you're going to have a two-story building. And so if you shoot the floor area ratio up, the more likely you're going to have a 2 or 3-story building. The floor area ratio along the highway in our commercial, what is it, the outer highway commercial sub-area is 0.25. And so it's less, and so there's less chance you're going to have 2-story buildings out there. But yet they did adopt a floor area ratio to help encourage in somewhat the potential of multi-story buildings. And so that, I think that's what it would do at the lower numbers, is it will help incentivize or encourage two-story buildings by having a floor area ratio versus not having one at all. Another, the other development standards are minimum and maximum setbacks. So we have a 0 minimum setback, meaning people can build all the way up to the sidewalk, all the way up to their property boundary. But we won't let them set back any more than 10 feet. And so if they choose to set back, we'll let them, but not any more than 10 feet from the sidewalk. And in that case, there'll be a place for them to do a little bit of landscaping, since we still have a landscaping requirement. And it says 60-foot height we have downtown. And there's a maximum 30,000 square foot building size in the downtown area. And so the idea of a Fred Meyer coming into downtown, what we prefer to see, if one would consider it, and Target is now developing in downtown areas, but they're multi-story. And you don't see a multi-story Target around this area. I mean, it's rare, but that's what they're doing now in downtowns all across the country, is those big boxes are coming downtown. They don't look anything like the ones you and I see out on the highways.
So more like the old department stores when we
Yeah.
were young.
They sure are.
Yeah.
And so they used to say, no way we can do that, or will we do that? But it goes back to planning again, based upon a vision of what you want for your downtown. And if you want multiple story buildings, or you want a compact downtown so it's easily walkable, then you demand that they build a multi-story Target or a multi-story Fred Meyer, and you tell them that they can't be any more than 30,000 square feet because you're worried about some of the other negative impacts if you take up too much of your downtown, or it's a multi-block type development. Then you might be blocking the street connectivity or something if they were to come. So anyhow, that's what we currently have. And we do not have a development standard that specifically says a minimum of 2 floors are required in the downtown core commercial C1 district. And we could, if we wanted to. It'd be simple. There'd be no question that you have to do it if we just put it in our little chart as a development standard, minimum 2 floors required. I personally believe that if we do that, I know some of you, in fact, I'm almost sure that you may disagree, that this idea of an exception for buildings that appear to look like 2 stories or something, I think is perfectly reasonable, because one of the advantages is that visual aesthetic feeling that you get in the downtown area. And if the height of the buildings are almost identical to a real 2-story building, and they have windows on 2 levels, to me, that's okay. It may be hurting, if you really want 2 stories everywhere, it may be hurting the fact that there's really no additional 2nd-story floor area to provide that housing or office space up there that would further it even more, if that was your vision. But it's a potential way to compromise on things. Another possibility on exceptions, if you were moving towards 2 floors, is only a small percentage of the 2nd floor of a single project would have to be 2 stories, so that you wouldn't have to have equal square foot above as you have on the footprint down below.
Isn't that already taken up in the FAR, though? That's how we got the building.
That's how we got the
Yeah.
memory care, is
Right.
that we made an interpretation of our code that said that the second floor didn't have to be the same square footage as the first. It just had to have a second
Well, did that
story.
not pass the FAR then? Because
Oh,
if it passed the floor area ratio,
It passes the floor area ratio by simply having another story. And so, yeah, I mean, it complied with the floor area ratio, but that floor area ratio doesn't say anything about whether the top floor has to be the same square footage as the bottom floor. At least in that case, they were able to meet it. And so, how they all interreact and how they're going to work in every situation, I don't know. I guess I can't anticipate all of those individual situations, especially with the floor area ratio and how it's going to always work. But they certainly met it, and they didn't have to do, the same square footage on the top. And as you can understand in their circumstance, their Alzheimer's residents, they don't want them having to climb stairs or ride elevators or have them go upstairs. And so they put their office upstairs, and that satisfied them in order to meet the requirement. So let's see here. This is just that definition of where our core commercial sub-area is right now, which I already told you about, along First, Second Avenues, between, actually, this says between Cedar and Knott's, and extending along Grant and Holly Passway Park. And then our design review standards, they provide a framework of how the building should look and function and feel. And the more specific we can be in those design standards, the easier it is for a developer to come to town or an existing business to redevelop their building and know if it'll be approved. And so that's the advantage of having good specific design elements and not having a situation where they come to the planning commission and two members of the planning commission says, because of their own aesthetics, I don't like that. That's not pretty. But I hired an architect that worked 16 hours going over your code, and we met it to the T, and now you're saying you just don't like it. And so that's developer unfriendly, and your economic development director will say, that's not promoting business and can be if they can't follow your code and design a building that is passable. And so that's part of the Planning Commission's job and duty too, is to think about economic development and being developer friendly. And one of the ways to do that is to design your code in a way that if they meet it, you'll approve it. And we'll have those types of examples come before us, even with subdivision developments that you're going to see soon. For instance, a neighborhood's desired to not see two-story homes next to their existing house. We have infill standards, but they don't absolutely prevent a two-story home. They say if you're going to do one, you've got to step it back so the wall of the two-story house isn't right up to the setback. And some neighbors think that our infill standards prohibit two-story homes, but they don't. They strongly, they make it more difficult to do a two-story home, but they don't stop a two-story home. And we're not sure our code really gives the Planning Commission authority to say, no, you can't do a two-story home, currently. And so that's something you'll be facing soon with the subdivision, I believe, that's coming before you, because there'll be neighbors